The paradox of the modern world order is that the main global criminal indeed, the notorious one, is still one of the principal guarantors of security on the planet. Contrary to all logic, Russia is a permanent member of the UN Security Council and holds veto power.
All these so-called formulas are simply a road to nowhere, and the sooner this fact is fully realized in Washington, London, Paris, and Brussels, the better it will ultimately be for both Ukraine and the West.
We are living in a period of diplomatic schizophrenia when Russia openly violates all UN charters. It has launched a war of aggression, kidnaps children, tortures prisoners, commits war crimes against civilians, supports terrorists like the Taliban and Hamas, and, to top it all off, blatantly disregards Security Council resolutions that it itself voted for. Moscow, in defiance of UN sanctions, has entered into a military alliance with North Korea.
I don't know any other country where people are so painfully, so deeply suffocated, truly suffocated.
And Russia cannot be punished because it is Russia itself that decides in the UN whether to punish itself or not.
Honestly, absolute, complete, utter idiot.
The world would be completely different without wars and genocides if another country sat in the Security Council instead of that insane gas station. And there should be another country there. Russia slyly stole Ukraine's seat in the UN Security Council. You didn't mishear that. Kyiv had every right to permanent membership in the main international body. The quilted jackets are now missing threads below the waist. How can that be? Russia is the successor of the USSR. Ukraine doesn't even exist.
We all know these historical facts quite well, and they are often discussed when examining the region's past. As you said, all of the South Russian lands were transferred during the process of forming what became Soviet Ukraine. This transfer of territory occurred specifically during the creation of the USSR. It is important to note that at that time, there was no Ukraine as a separate entity within the Russian Empire, right?
Z-patriots and ordinary Muscovites, for some reason, are firmly convinced that the USSR was Russia. As if it were a continuation of the Russian Empire. But this is, to put it mildly, a misconception, and to put it bluntly, a stupid, delusional lie. The Russian Federation was just one part of the USSR, like the other republics. Moreover, the authorities of Soviet Russia openly declared that they were not the successors of the Russian Empire. By executing the Tsar in the basement, they once again confirmed their position.
This morning, the beautiful bust of Nicholas II, our sovereign, which we installed in the central square near the small chapel, as you know, indeed, began to exude and emit myrrh.
And now you Vatniks, go ahead and start calling an ambulance which won't reach you anyway because of the ruined roads. It wasn't the USSR that created Ukraine. Rather, Ukraine created the USSR on equal terms with Russia. The Soviet Union was essentially a confederation, a union composed of several independent states. So when some Russian, perhaps drunk on window cleaner, shrieks that Ukraine has always been an inseparable part of Russia, by that same logic, you could just as easily claim that Russia was, in fact, once part of Ukraine.
It goes in, and then it comes ooh.
And actually, there's even more basis for that. Right now, I'm genuinely worried for the Vatniks because to the international community, the Ukrainian SSR existed, but the RSFSR did not. Unlike Russia, Ukraine is one of the founding members of the UN, and importantly, as an independent entity separate from the USSR. Ukraine had its own diplomatic mission at the UN. Unlike Soviet Russia, neither the RSFSR nor the modern Russian Federation has ever ratified the UN Charter. Which means, drumroll please, that in fact, Russia is actually not a member of the United Nations at all. As a matter of fact, it is not even, let alone, a permanent member of the Security Council.
In which seat, for God's sake?
In that seat on the Security Council, which Russia occupies illegally due to behind-the-scenes manipulations after the collapse of the Soviet Union, sit liars whose job is to justify the aggression and genocide carried out by Russia. And all actions of the UN, both by the Security Council and the General Assembly that could have stopped this aggression, are thwarted by the privilege that this seat gives to the aggressor.
Russia obtained its place on the Security Council only thanks to fraud on an especially large planetary scale. How can a country that is not even formally a member of the UN have the right of veto there? In theory, after the collapse of the USSR, Ukraine should have taken the seat on the Security Council as a founding member of the UN and the holder of the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world. The claim that Russia is supposedly the successor to the Soviet Union is an argument for the poor and intellectually unburdened. When the USSR finally, ultimately, and irreversibly ceased to exist, all the former Soviet republics were officially recognized as its successors by the international community in accordance with the agreement on succession regarding the external state debt and assets of the Soviet Union. All 15 republics are successors. And Russia itself signed this in 1991.
Everything is lost! Everything is lost! Oh.
So it turns out that Ukraine is the successor of the Union and a founding member of the UN. But somehow, the Russian Federation ends up in the Security Council with veto power, even though there's still no mention of it in the organization's foundational documents. Yeltsin simply wrote a letter to the UN and declared that Russia would take the USSR's place, and that's it. They came, changed the nameplates, and started celebrating this unbelievably absurd substitution. This completely violates the UN Charter. In order to take the Union's place, the Russian Federation first had to do one small thing: join the UN. And for that, there's a clear procedure, without which it's impossible to become a member of the organization. The candidate had to be officially approved by the Security Council, and then 2/3 of the member states had to vote for it at the General Assembly. But no one did that. Russia didn't even submit an application. So it turns out that there are some unclear people from a non-existent country sitting on the Security Council, a country that hasn't even ratified the very UN Charter. How did this become possible? Quite simply, in 1991, the Secretary-General of the United Nations turned a blind eye to the manipulations, very much in the UN style. There could be countless legends told about the chronic blindness and deafness of this toy organization.
Could you help me cross the street?
Now, the imposter country uses the Security Council solely to evade responsibility for its crimes and to spread aggressive propaganda.
However, as we know, our Western colleagues are not interested in the truth. And true to the best traditions of provocation, like the one in Bucha or with the Mariupol hospitals that was mentioned today, they try to pass off wishful thinking as reality, condemning what they claim was a deliberate strike by the Russian aerospace forces on a children's medical facility. It is clear that it was a missile from the Ukrainian air defense.
The Security Council has now become a place where people seriously talk about combat mosquitoes.
Such a drone transports a container with many mosquitoes carriers of infection to a designated area and releases them. When they bite, the mosquitoes infect targeted people with pathogens of especially dangerous diseases. The explanation explicitly emphasizes that an infected serviceman will be unable to carry out the tasks assigned to him.
For most countries in the world, listening to this nonsense from the UN podium has simply become unacceptable. That's why people started openly trolling the Muscovites.
Bats, birds, mosquitoes. Russia knows that laboratories study migratory species in order to identify pathogens. This is the standard practice. There you go. Only bats and birds ignore sovereign borders, just like Russia does.
By abusing its illegal veto power, Russia continues to mock common sense and human civilization.
As in previous cases, the civilian population was not threatened by the Russian military, no matter how hard the Zelensky regime and its Western sponsors try to prove otherwise.
The Russian delegation at the UN has 3 tasks: to lie a lot, and to lie even more.
Well, regarding your question about whether we plan to attack other countries, we do not plan to attack other countries. We did not attack Ukraine.
A permanent member of the Security Council does only what creates danger in the world. Ironically, stupidity and courage, that's the motto of the Russian delegation at the UN. Here, some bold figure is trying to protest against the speech of the president of Ukraine. The reaction of the Albanian Prime Minister, who is presiding over the council, is priceless.
May I say that hearing a lecture from you about rule violations is quite an impressive attempt. You have repeatedly said that the violation is that President Zelensky will speak before the Security Council members. There is a solution to this. Stop the war, and President Zelensky will not take the floor.
Then the fake member of the Security Council finally lost not only the last remnants of pride, but also the basic cognitive functions that distinguish a human from an encephalitic tick. After 2 years of massive shelling of Ukraine, after the destruction of dozens of cities and hundreds of settlements, Russia convened the Security Council to complain about the shelling of Belgorod.
City centers and residential neighborhoods were shelled with cluster munitions from multiple launch rocket systems from the border town of Bolchansk in the Kharkiv region. Here are links to videos recorded by Belgorod residents showing the moment the missile struck.
Even the German Nazis in their graves were stunned by such blatantly shameless whining. It's especially funny that Mordor demanded the Czech delegation appear at the meeting, because you see, their weapons are being used to shell the abscess codenamed Why Us?
Today, on June 30th, we were officially given fire extinguishers to old lady Shura, 84th year. She'll be climbing on the roof and running to the neighbors, putting out houses.
The Czech side's response was brilliant. We will be happy to attend the meeting when Russia wants to discuss the withdrawal of its occupation forces at the Security Council. Just imagine the outcry that erupted in the swamps. The toads were curling up into tubes.
We consider we can use tactical nuclear weapons. In other words, we are escalating any delivery of anything bad.
This pseudo-state has spouted so much nonsense in the UN that only the lazy or Orban haven't mocked them.
This is already the fourth or fifth meeting. I've honestly lost track, colleagues. So I have to ask, doesn't the Security Council have anything better to do? I wonder how would these mosquitoes distinguish between Russians and Ukrainians?
Ukraine, of course, holds the lead in internationally humiliating the aggressor. We can't live without it. Just give us a chance to rub the brazen Mokshan face in it.
Do the Russians want war? Ask those soldiers who lie beneath the birch trees.
A non-existent state, something like the so-called Russian Federation, is in the UN in violation of all norms and the charter of this organization. That's why Mordor must be immediately expelled from the United Nations. And even if we turn a blind eye to how Russia got there, it still must be expelled for systematically violating the basic principles and rules of this organization. Moscow attacked a neighboring country and is threatening Europe with nuclear weapons. Hello? What more arguments do you need? Moreover, UN sanctions should be imposed on Eritrea, and they should be even tougher than those against North Korea. There is absolutely no reason to consider the Russian Federation a member of the UN, let alone a permanent member of the Security Council, because throughout history, not a single state has become a UN member without following the procedure for admission set out in the UN Charter. After the split, both the Czech Republic and Slovakia joined the UN as separate states. The same happened after the breakup of Yugoslavia. All the newly formed countries went through the procedure. And only Russia is still riding the international tram without a ticket. Ukraine rightfully deserves to take Russia's place on the UN Security Council. More precisely, Ukraine should take its own seat, which for some reason has been occupied by some incorrigible drunkard.
I would like to respectfully ask the delegates of the member countries who voted in favor of the admission of the official Russian delegation to the United Nations, which is recognized as a major international organization. Please raise your hand. Maybe someone can kindly lend me their glasses, because my eyesight must really be failing me. I honestly don't see a single hand raised. Did anyone vote? Did any country vote for Russia's membership?
I would like to remind you that this video is created for entertainment purposes and contains elements of satire and irony. All facts and events are presented in a hyperbolized or exaggerated form to convey a comedic or dramatic effect. Our goal is not to mislead, but to highlight humor. Please take it with a smile.